for the oppressed, for the marginalized as well. There was no, it was seamless. There was no, you had to do a leap or do any intellectual gymnastics to get to that. That was, in fact, the gospel message. So that's been ingrained in me from early, and it's in many ways what led me to run, or I should say led me to accept, to answer positively to the call. Folk asked me to run, and my understanding of my involvement and my understanding theologically and politically how they are in tension with one another really sealed the deal for me. So I've been around this stuff for a long time.
Definitely. Sounds like you've been definitely involved for a number of years. I've got one other call, and I think we might have a couple of other ones as well. But before we, and I want you to stay on the line because we want to continue the conversation on a variety of
Absolutely.
topics. But one thing I did want to get to before we get to the other callers and everything was, of course, Durham has been in the news a lot lately. We alluded to it last week on the podcast because of what was going on with McDougal Terrace and things of that nature.
Sure.
And, of course, that's a public housing community. And, of course, we've got people that have moved out because of things that have been discovered there in terms of carbon monoxide and other things. And, of course, there were some fatalities that were very sad and that we're very deeply moved by and everything. But I just wanted to know what your thoughts on that whole issue is, and also what your thoughts are just in general about some of the pressing issues that are going on in our community. Of course, that being one of them. I've got a friend that is always constantly complaining about his housing needs because he is a veteran.
Sure.
He's trying to get involved in his music career and is currently living in the same apartment complex that I'm living in. But, you know, apartment rents are not cheap. I mean, I'm in one of the cheaper ones in Duke Manor, and that's going like, you know, the rent here is around $750, $800, and that's considered one of the lower end ones. But we've got others that are even higher end than that and everything. So I'm just wondering what some of your thoughts are, one about what's going on with McDougal Terrace, and also just about the housing concerns in general that people have in our community.
Sure, absolutely. Well, first let me say, you mentioned the fatalities. I think it's important to say that the state medical examiner recently came out and said that there's no indication that the deaths of those infants, those horrific deaths of those precious little babies, were linked to carbon monoxide. I actually got into my first Twitter beef with a presidential candidate just recently. Tom Steyer visited Durham on Saturday, and he tweeted out that he was touring McDougal Terrace, where babies are literally dying from carbon monoxide poisoning. And I tweeted his campaign and saying, sir, Councilperson Middleton here, babies are literally not dying from CO here. We're working hard to prevent that. And I think his campaign's taking the tweet down, and I'm hoping they'll be issuing a statement soon. So that was kind of like my little first official Twitter beef with the presidential candidate. And I say that to say, however, that the deaths of those infants not being linked to carbon monoxide in no way lessens the severity of the alarm and seriousness of the issue, because you could die. Babies could die. So, and I said at our last council meeting, I went on record, I said, based upon what I've seen at McDougal Terrace, and it's in my ward, by the way. I'm the Ward 2 council person. We don't have a true ward system in Durham. I have to live in the ward, but the entire city votes for me. But McDougal Terrace falls in my ward, and I said to my colleagues and to the public that I think the conditions there presented a clear and present danger and an imminent threat to the lives of our people. So I supported the move of the Chief Executive Officer of the Durham Housing Authority, Anthony Scott, to move those folk out. It wasn't a mandatory evacuation. They gave folk an opportunity because many folk were not only concerned about carbon monoxide, they were concerned about mold and backed up septic systems, and some folk literally had feces backing up into their home. Don't mean to be so graphic, but this is the realness of the situation. So I supported the move out, and I know it's incredibly difficult to just have your life uprooted and to have to be living out of a hotel room. But I assured the people of McDougal Terrace, and I assured the people of the city of Durham that at least while I'm sitting on that council, I certainly won't countenance any attempts to have people move back into an unsafe condition. We're not going to have folk painting over mold spots where some of the residents said they'd gone back and saw workers painting over the mold rather than actually treating the underlying problem. So I'm committed to doing all we need to do. Now, with that, and I hope some folks from HUD are listening, the Durham Housing Authority, of course, their chief funder and their chief oversight organization entity is the federal government. It's HUD. Shout out to Ben Carson if you're listening. And we've seen a steady decrease in funding from HUD to our nation's housing authorities for things like repairs, which are sorely needed. McDougal Terrace was built in 1953. It's the oldest and largest public housing complex in our city. There are other ones that have problems as well. But the systemic chickens have come home to roost. These problems did not start within the last 2 years or 5 years or even 10 years. These problems have been festering for almost half of a century. And now, as I said, the systemic chickens are coming home to roost, and I'm committed to working with my colleagues and committed to calling on my colleagues to spend what we can and what is necessary to rectify the situation at McDougal Terrace and make it habitable before we bring anybody back in there or allow people to return.
Yeah, that sounds like a good and safe way to do things, and I think that you and the rest of the city council are definitely handling that situation in a very fair and just kind of way. So I definitely applaud what y'all are doing there. And you're right, you never can tell when things will happen that will cause you to have concerns. I mean, I was glad this morning when I woke up that I did not live in a house and lived in an apartment, because when I woke up, I heard a rattling noise in my house, and at first I thought it was the water heater, and later learned that it was the furnace. So fortunately, my apartment complex people have been here. They have replaced the motor, because it was the entire motor for the furnace that was going out, and like I said, it woke me up early this morning. So oftentimes you don't have any idea what might happen in the course of a day. So like I said, I knew I woke up early this morning and it was like, what the heck is that rattling noise? And like I said, both the furnace and the water heater in the same kind of closet area. So I was like automatically thinking it's the water heater. But when the guy came here, the first repairman, and told me that it was the furnace, I was like, good grief. And then just about a minute or two before starting this show, one of his coworkers came in and has replaced the furnace, and it's sounding the motor. It's sounding nice and running effectively right now. So like I said, you oftentimes don't know what will happen in the course of a day. So that's just another case of something happening. So that's one of the advantages to being in an apartment complex, is that you have somebody that you can send an email to or send a call to, and they'll send somebody out to you to try to repair it at some point or another and try to get it fixed as fast as possible.
Absolutely. Can I just say one other thing, man, that the response from the people of Durham have just been overwhelming in terms of donations and food and logistical support for our brothers and sisters, our neighbors, our residents, our citizens that live in McDougal Terrace that have been displaced. And I just want to shout out folk. I particularly want to shout out this dynamic, emergent young leader, Sister Ashley Kennedy, who's the president of the Durham House of the DHA of the Resident Council at McDougal Terrace. She's their president, and her leadership has just been transcendent and transformative for that community. And I just want to shout her out and all those that have been rallying around her, the merchants, restaurant owners, transportation companies, Durham Public Schools, that have just marshaled resources and a great deal of compassion to respond to this issue. You hear folk often say that it's the worst of times that oftentimes bring out the best in us. And what is an absolutely dire, heartbreaking situation, I've actually seen nobility and flashes of grace all over the place. So I just want to shout out the people of the Bull City who have been amazing in their response to this crisis. And it is a crisis, but we're rising to meet the challenge, and we're going to beat it.
Yep, and I also need to shout out a friend of mine who will hopefully be on the show very shortly. But as you know, the Hayti Heritage Center has a couple of churches that meet out of the building. One of them, of course, being Christ Central, but the other one is a church by the name of the 6-8 Church, and that's Darrell Briscoe and his wife Tracy. Sure. And I know that Tracy came and spoke in front of the city council not that long ago, I think sometime last week, and was basically talking about how even though she is married to an African-American man, but she is a European woman, but she definitely knows that in some cases she felt that her privilege, or that whole thing of white privilege, is part of the reason that folks might listen to her quicker than they might listen to others. But, they didn't just come out there and just come out and give it lip service. They were actually doing things in the community, and actually that was part of Darrell's message to his congregation yesterday, was that he hoped that other members of the church would do like his wife did, and that they would continue serving the community, because, like I said, they meet in the Hayti Heritage Center, and as you know, the Hayti Heritage Center is literally just around the corner from McDougal Terrace, so they feel that it's part of their concerns, and I'm sure that it's the same with Christ Central. I haven't had the chance to talk to Pastor Timothy Price and their lead pastor, Daniel Mason, as to what they're doing, but I'm sure that they are going to be doing stuff in the community as well as the other churches that are all around that community, because there are a number of churches that are nearby the Hayti Heritage Center and also nearby McDougal Terrace, including some that are actually physically in McDougal Terrace. So I'm sure that a lot of these will continue to rise into the occasion and rise into do things. I do want to get to one of the guests that I've got, and I think I'm expecting another one of your political people to go in the conversation very shortly. But before we get to them, I know one of your other important issues that you always talked about, and some people think that some people might have thought that you went too far on one side or not far enough on the other, but you have always been one that has encouraged people to look at the ways that we do things with our police force. And Dean has actually worked in the correction system in New Jersey, so he knows a little bit about the police force and law enforcement and things of that nature. So I do know that has always been an important issue of yours, is one, making sure that we give adequate support to our police, but also making sure that they are not abusing their power. So I just want to hear a little bit about what you had to say about that, and I also want to hear what you had to say about the Duke employees, because I know you were involved with that as well.
Sure.
But we'll get to that later. I would be more interested in hearing about your thoughts on police and law enforcement, and then I do want to get to the other guests as well. So if you can give me an answer on that, and then we'll get to one of the other guests as well.
Absolutely, and I appreciate the question. Most of my public portfolio that most people in Durham are aware of, that one that got the most coverage, was my work along with some incredible activists. Shout out to Spirit House, shout out to FADE Coalition here in Durham, who created a groundswell around reforming our police department. I was a part of the leadership apparatus of an organization called Durham CAN, which is Congregations, Associations, and Networks, perhaps the largest, most diverse grassroots organization that's issue-oriented. It's not an endorsing or political organization. It's an issue-based organization here in Durham. I was very proud to be part of the leadership apparatus of that organization, and I led their efforts in participation in coalition with these other organizations led by FADE Coalition to push for some critical changes to our police department, cultural changes. One of the changes that it culminated in was the hiring of a brilliant black woman named Sarah Lynn Davis as the chief of our police department, who's no nonsense and who takes no mess and has been doing work to transform the culture of our department. And in so doing, that informs the decisions I make as to how much resources they're going to get, how much weight I put on her ass. I trust the work that the activists have done here in this city to transform this department. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But I remember the work that they've done, and I trust the work that they've done. And because I trust the work that they've done, I'm not hesitant or reticent about honoring the request. I see her as a transformative leader, much like I see our new district attorney, Satana DeBerry, as a transformative leader within a system that has historically brought hell to black people's lives and brown people's lives. The criminal justice system and the police department is an extension of that. However, Durham is not Ferguson. Durham is not L.A. In the 80s with the Rampart Division. It's not the Chicago Police Department, no disrespect to Mayor Lightfoot, the older Chicago Police Department. So what my position has been, listen, you're not going to find anybody who is more ready to pounce when there is state-sanctioned violence against black people or when police departments do something that's egregious. Just Google me. Just check my history. So, but I tell people all the time now that I'm a governing progressive, which means that we're in power now. We won. And the bulwark against over-policing, I've gotten into some discussions where some folks say, well, if you hire more police, it'll be over-policing. And I say, no. Over-policing is not a numerical phenomena. Over-policing is a cultural phenomenon. If you don't hire any more police today forever, you can still deploy that to police department in a way where you're over policing certain communities. The bull